All right, Doug, we're back. It's been a while since we've done one of these in the normal format. You're here in Uruguay, not too far from where I am, but a lot has happened. I mean, so much has happened that some of it's not even worth talking about it because past it's been washed away by other happenings.
Yes. What was Kamala's phrase exactly? We're constantly unburdened by what has been as the news cycle drives on, and the news cycle only lasts about 24 hours for almost anything these days. So yeah, you're quite correct.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we try to keep up on top of these things, and you realize when you're not, it doesn't make any difference anyway. So it kind of brings
No,
into
it
question
doesn't.
what the point of anything is.
Well, and there's certainly nothing we can do about it. So it's just idle conversation on our part, perhaps.
Yeah, I think you're right. But the big thing that has happened geopolitically now, just that's is there obviously the stuff in Ukraine is still happening. There were new weapons used by Russia, all that, but it seems like Trump wants to solve that. Israel was flaring up with Lebanon, and then they got a ceasefire, and then immediately things explode in Syria. And just what's your big picture take on what's happening?
Well, perhaps nothing's really changed because that I think it was a Tom Lehrer song from the 1960s. And if I recall the lyrics, they're rioting in Africa, they're starving in Spain, uh, and the rest of it. And I think another part of that song, the same song, or maybe it was a related song, the French hate the Germans hate the Dutch, and I don't like anybody very much. So nothing's really changed, at least within my lifetime. But it does seem everything's accelerating and becoming more compressed. Uh, the news cycle is speeding up for a number of reasons, actually. But okay, so what was the question before I went
Well,
off on a tangent, I
well,
think?
basically the big picture on what's happening? Because I think the thing that seems to be spreading is the kinetic conflict. In my mind, that's
Hmm.
the one. Like this is a chaotic system. Lots of changes are always occurring, but the fact that it's going to armed conflict with so many different participants in it, especially in places like Syria, you can't even tell which side the Turks are on, even in that whole thing.
That's right. You don't know who's on first anymore. And it's interesting that we even talk about Syria because Syria has always just been a region ever since pre-Roman times where there have been many groups with different religious groups, ethnic groups, linguistic groups. It's not a real country. It's basically the most ancient part of the world, and it's not a real country. And right now, as far as I can determine, uh, I've been to Syria twice, actually, for about a week each time, frankly, and I saw a fair part of the country. And uh, as far as I can kind of figure out from reports, is it's about three or four or five or six, or maybe seven or eight different regions that are under control by various governments and or criminal gangs. So it's not a real country at all. So you can't really talk about Syria as other than a region. And actually, the same is true of Libya, which is definitely at least two separate countries, only one of which I think is represented, has a seat in the United Nations, but it's two. And actually, it's three countries, I think. Uh, but who knows? I mean, these places are falling apart, and the governments of the world and the mass media pretend that they're still entities, but they're not.
Hmm. Do you what I felt like we've been in the third world war for a while now, but it just doesn't takes a while to come to the point of public consciousness to recognize what's happening. And um, and what you see in Syria now seems so confusing to me. It it makes me think of we've also put Ukraine in this category before of Spain in advance of World War II. There's so many different belligerents in there, jockeying for territory, testing new weapon systems.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that?
I think I think we're heading towards World War III, definitely, because it just seems like pressures build up, and then people have to fight it out at some point, periodically. And it seems that we're heading towards that now. Even if we look at World War I, it was um, the whole world, and really the whole world was really just Europe at that time, was extremely prosperous. Everybody had been growing their GNP and their production and their general prosperity hand over fist for decades because of the Industrial Revolution. And everything was hunky-dory. Everything was going along tickety-boo, as they say. And they got into a catastrophic war over just the assassination of an Austrian official. So things were going well then, but I don't think things are going particularly well in the world right now, because back then we had stable currencies. There wasn't much debt in the world. Governments had only a minor influence on the life of the average guy from day to day anywhere. There were minor things. 5-10% of the GNP was taken by the government. So, and World War I was an utter and complete catastrophe that changed world history. Now we've got a much more unstable situation, and everybody's kind of plumping for a fight. So yeah, I think World War III is on the way. I don't know what the exact nature of it'll be, but yeah, we're headed for the big one.
Just two comments about World War One. I read a book called The African Kaiser, actually, and it was very interesting. I think you'd enjoy it. It's about this General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, I guess. And it was interesting about it was this basically general who was fighting in World War One on behalf of the Germans in Africa. And
Hmm.
you always think of Europe. You think of the centerpiece as only Europe, but there's a reason why it was called a world war, is that it spilled over all over the place.
Yeah, so that would have been in Germany when Tanganyika was a German colony, or it could have been when Namibia was a German colony, or when Cameroon was a German colony. And I think I'm missing another place. So where would he have been? Uh,
Mm.
Probably East Africa. You remember
Yes,
the,
it
did
was East
you
Africa.
ever see the Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn movie, The African Queen?
Yes. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, great movie, actually.
Yeah, I really like it. Yeah, it was what was just shocking to me is I just didn't understand the scope of the conflict well outside off the continent. I just didn't even understand it. So, but we're like now we see this too. I mean, you could argue there's what Wagner troops that are working in Africa, so there is spillover. I mean, apparently some Ukrainian special forces have, been deployed to different areas in Africa as well. It's bizarre actually that there is spillover already in these kind of minor, no one even notices them conflicts all over the world already. So
Yeah, that's right. And maybe we're witnessing the rise of genuine private armies. They've always been there because when in the 19th century, what was his name? His first name was Walker, who was called a he was a freebooter, but there's another name. Basically tried to conquer Nicaragua and Honduras and Costa Rica. A filibuster was the term they used for these guys, and he almost succeeded. So,
Yeah, I was just reading about this guy actually. Now I looked him up. Yeah, filibustering expeditions. He went to Mexico and Nicaragua at different points.
yeah, I mean, those were the days you rounded up a few friends that, you know, let's, this country looks like it's low-hanging fruit. Let's take it over and have some fun. Well, I guess you could still do that today, but it's not as easy as it used to be because, I remember taking a taking a course that was taught by Jean Kilpatrick, who you may recall was the American ambassador to the United Nations. And she was one of my professors at Georgetown. And I do remember very distinctly sitting in her class with a friend of mine, Vince Ogg, who later became a judge in Cincinnati. And we had different ideas. We were less law-abiding in those days than we are now. And Kilpatrick mentioned, yes, in Africa today, a few white men with military experience can easily take over a country. And this is what Kilpatrick, who is the ambassador to the United Nations, was telling her students in class because it was factually accurate. Okay. I don't think you can do that anymore because in those days, there weren't any native African armies to speak of. It was possible, but now it's not possible because these guys, courtesy of the US and others, have gotten, serious military training and serious weapons. So you can't just come in and knock over a country anymore. Those days are kind of gone.
Oh well. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe in the after whatever happens in the next couple of decades, maybe there'll be a new opportunity for a new generation to
That's
take over.
right. It could happen as these African countries break up, which they will do along tribal and ethnic lines, and they'll need outside help to organize things a bit for them. So yeah, sure, the market always presents new opportunities,
Well,
and the Russians are in a good position to take advantage of it now. They're having, yeah, it's great. And maybe
and
the
the
Ukrainians
Chinese.
now, there's going to be lots of Ukrainian guys with serious military experience that are going to decide, I'm not really suited to do much else other than go out and fight. Where's the best place to fight? Well, yeah, probably Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the way that World War One became World War One is that for some reason every major state was forced or felt compelled to pick sides in the whole thing, and that's you definitely see that happening now. And those sides they're firming up. I think that like what this is a moment of truth for Turkey, for instance. Like, what side are they really on? And you're seeing, they seem to be. Actually, I don't even want to say it because it's so confusing right now. But it seems to be that they've basically chosen to be on the opposite side of the Russians and what's happening now, at least. And everyone's picking sides, and you see this transcends maybe the kinetic stuff. It goes into the economic matters, and then from that, the other day, we know about the rise of BRICS as an economic union. It's been going on for a
Mm.
while and was kind of a nothing burger until the U.S. took made this catastrophic error with seizing the reserve assets of Russia. And then now it's started to become more of an economic reality. Still a long way to go before, is a real serious threat. But the first time Trump ever mentioned BRICS, as far as I know, was in his threat to them that he made the other day, that if they did not essentially kiss the ring of the dollar, that they would be on the business side of 100% tariff. And what do you think of that whole? I know it could be a negotiating play with him. He always starts off really hard, like with Rocket Man in North Korea, and they end up being friends, right? So it could be a negotiation ploy, but I don't know. What do you just think of the comment in general?
Dangerous and foolish, and he's like setting himself up to not be taken seriously because it's kind of a ridiculous comment. I mean, you can't look. It bears saying again, the major export by far of the U.S. for the last over 40 years It's not been soybeans or Boeings, it's been the dollar. So, and the export of the dollar is largely responsible for the high standard of living we have in the US. We ship paper money to them and they ship real wealth to us. It's been a great trade so far, except that's a huge liability that's building up. So yeah, I can see why Trump, somebody explained to him probably that this is the way it works. So yeah, he doesn't want to see the dollar not be accepted because it's going to result in not only a collapse in our standard of living, but the reimportation of all those dollars in exchange for real wealth, which will go the other way. Yeah, I understand that. So, but listen, it's like you jump off the top of a building. How are you going to stop yourself from hitting the ground? This has been going on for 40 years, and just threatening these people, which the U.S. isn't in a position to do anymore, isn't going to work. It's just going to create more antagonism, you know.
Yeah, and it's one of my concerns in this bifurcation from an economic perspective. I guess I'd like to talk to you more about it later to flesh out my own thinking around it. But the idea that there does seem to be a real bifurcation of the world and on economic lines where there's at least a preference for BRICS countries to trade with one another over Western countries, and that you start to see these things like China, has a new ban on certain minerals to the U.S. now, and they're the great source of those minerals for us. And maybe it's just a warning shot. Maybe it's something that'll be a real big problem for us. I don't know, but and you see China working to make real inroads in certain countries. They have this new port that's coming online in Peru, for instance. They've made huge infrastructure investments in Africa and a lot of Latin America. There are countries that have aligned more with them with their resources, or they get preferential sale to the Chinese. They prefer to sell into that market than to the U.S. market for a whole bunch of reasons. And my concern is really that we've taken for granted that we know what the price of soybeans are because we can see it, traded on the Chicago Board of Trade. We can see it, and we can see how much iron ore is going for, at least, in the futures market. And I know that's not exactly representative of reality completely in any one time because there's private contracts that the sales really occur. But I see this bifurcation of these markets themselves, and the price discovery mechanism gets really confused in that, because if China is the biggest consumer of all of these minerals, and more their purchases are opaque to Western markets, not going through Western exchanges, what effect does that have on us, on the Western markets, on the mining companies we invest in? And I don't know. Does what I'm saying make sense? I worry about as these markets bifurcate. Could we find out that there's not a market for things that there's the value in? Because
well, just a general comment that I don't think anybody really considers very much. It's that people talk about China's doing this, the US is doing that, Germany's doing the third thing. But wait a minute, these governments don't produce anything. It's the companies within these countries that actually mine things and build things and sell things. So it's dysfunctional that individual companies should be making these decisions as to who they buy from and sell to and for how much. And when we talk about China or the US or any other, it's actually the government. It's like they actually control all these companies and tell them what they can do and can't do, which is really dysfunctional because governments naturally make decisions based on political realities, political wants, as opposed to economic wants, which have to do with your standard of living and how well. So, that's wrong to start with. I hate talking about what a country is doing as opposed to what the many individual companies within that country might want to or might not want to do. But yeah, the US has tried to cut China off from technology and investments, and it's kind of tit for tat. I mean, this is like game theory. If somebody does something, well, you have to do something back. That's like standard game theory. Otherwise, if he gets away with it, well, let's do twice as much the next time. So you really have to, for every measure, there has to be a countermeasure. Otherwise, you're going to be walked over. And, if the Chinese do this, then Trump, as kind of belligerent as he tends to be, will say, oh, you're cutting off our supply of gallium. Well, we'll do something else to you. And now the Chinese have to do something else. And this is how it escalates. So it's bad news.
What happens to something like a big resource like copper if the major consumer of it is China? Um, we have copper investments. So like, I just wonder what happens to those if, if things escalate and this bifurcation continues. It's possible you could be sitting on you could own a great company in a great otherwise jurisdiction that allows them to produce it and all of that, but somehow it end up the whole investment be spoiled because of this idea that it becomes a national strategic priority of some kind to not do business with those bad guys.
Yeah. China needs all this copper to make all kinds of goods. And then if they can't export the goods, certainly not to the US at 100% duties or whatever ridiculous number Trump has come up with, and maybe he'll talk other countries into punishing China the same way. And so you're not going to be using that much copper anymore. I mean, it's really hard to predict. It's like a kaleidoscope. You change the kaleidoscope, the kid's toy, just a little bit, and everything changes just with a tiny little turn.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's definitely, you can't project anything in a linear basis anymore. Wild. Okay. Well, I wanted to get we have a few questions from some of our file members I wanted to get to, but first I wanted to just get your thoughts on this public assassination of this CEO of this health insurance company, United Health,
Oh
I think is
yeah.
the name of the company. Yeah. What?
Well, yeah. From what you know, uh, listen, I don't have health insurance. I don't need health insurance down here. And if you can avoid having insurance, you want to avoid it for all kinds of reasons. That's a whole separate discussion. But so I recently discovered that United Health is a gigantic health provider with what, 30 million, 40 million policyholders or whatever,
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
something like that. And another number that's in the news is that their rate of claim denial is twice the industry average and larger than that of any other company. And another factet that's come out is that the management, and I generally hate management and suits, just unless they're fine founding entrepreneurs. Uh, these guys are making a lot of money. And so, yeah, I think some little people might be pretty pissed off if they get their claims. Yeah, so my general feeling is, and I'm a nonviolent guy, is yeah, he had it coming.
Yeah. I mean, at least apparently he made, I don't know, something like $10 million in compensation for 2023. He sold $20 million worth of stock earlier this year in 2024. So he's a rich guy walking around the streets of New York alone. And yeah, this guy. What did you watch the video of the hit? Did you think that any thoughts about that specifically about what he did and how it was done? Because you wrote a book. It was a fiction. It was a novel, but a part of your trilogy. The last one was called Assassin.
Yes, yes, and Assassin, which is as a novel, I can recommend it as something that's fun to read with lots and lots of information in it that in today's world certainly is best presented in the form of fiction as opposed to nonfiction, if you don't want to get into a lot of trouble. And yeah, I think a case can be made for selectively punishing high up officials, certainly government officials, but really corporate officials too, since big corporations are hand in glove with the government in a fascist system. And Assassin talks about the moral case and the technical means for taking out cancerous elements. Well, hey, that's vigilantism. You shouldn't do that. But when the court system and the justice system becomes thoroughly dysfunctional, the market has to handle it. So yeah, read the book. It's on Amazon.
What is the root of the word vigilantism though? Vigilante. What's the
I don't know. Could it be from the word vigil and anti, before?
Let me see if I can find, because I'm just curious what vigilantism has a bad meaning, but the etymology of it, I just wonder what it actually means. It's derived from the Latin word vigilanus, which means watchful,
Mhm.
and
Ah,
yeah, so it's watchful, guardian.
right. Well,
Not so
vigilantism.
bad.
No, I don't think so. And really, it's only a bad thing when you have a functional and just court system. But uh, let's say you lived in, what would be a good example? If you lived in a chaotic country where there was no reliable system of justice, well, you have to straighten things out on a local individual level. And there are problems with it. But well, listen, this court case, this case in New York with the Marine who was
Yeah,
defending the other,
Daniel Perry.
yes, defending the other members, the other riders in the subway car from a lunatic. Well, I think he did the right thing, and what he did is completely justifiable, and he should get off with no penalties at all. That's what I think, because you
And
can't
and,
just
and
let.
and an award from the city, a good
Oh, and
citizen award.
yes, he should get an award from the city because you can't let a crazy, dangerous lunatic wander around like that. So yeah, he's a vigilante, and I think there's a place for vigilantism, unless you're going to put an official uniformed cop in every subway car and on every street corner and turn the place into a police state. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you have to have room for that, because the idea of the police is really that they're, I mean, the role that police really act as though they have, and my dad is a retired cop. They have a presence to make people feel that there's someone there, and then beyond that, it's to do the paperwork and to process after the crime. It's not to stop crime.
no,
They don't. It's just not how it works.
yeah, yeah,
So
that's right.
you have to have citizens that are engaged with the public order, or else you have public disorder. I don't know how to avoid it otherwise.
Yeah, and the way things are set up today, citizens that try to do the right thing, like Daniel Perry did, are punished and intimidated for trying to do the right thing. So it's our system is becoming rather dysfunctional. And this is something that I was talking about a lot more and was actually in the news. And this is the vigilantism within a courtroom. And this is the oh Jesus, why can't I remember what we call it? It's where a jury nullification.
Mm.
In other words, It used to be in the United States that a jury was the final arbiter of what was right or wrong. And it didn't matter what the law said. If somebody was being tried for, well, like in Daniel Perry's case or many, many other things, for breaking the law, if the jury thought no, it was justified and he should have broken the law, well, the jury would nullify the law. And I think that's the way it ought to be. But today, juries are universally instructed that they're supposed to follow the orders of the judge and the court. And they can't acquit a person just because they don't think the law is just, or that just because he violated the law, it was a good thing in this case. So I'm all for jury nullification, which is a form of vigilantism, actually.
Hmm.
But
When did that change? When did that change? Was there a court case that changed that, the role of the
yeah,
jury, or was it?
when did jury nullification become, uh, well, actually kind of illegal? When did that? When did that trend reverse? That change? It's a good question historically, because I was involved with the jury nullification movement, which had this is about 15 years ago, but now even the organization that I used to belong to, I was a director of it, actually. I should know, I should be able to remember, but it never got traction. Nobody cared.
Hmm. It says, uh, so technically they say it's still legal. They say it remains legal, but judges are not required to inform juries about it. Attorneys are often prohibited from explicitly arguing for nullification, and
Yep.
jurors can be removed if they express intent to nullify during selection.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've never been on a jury, and I had very mixed feelings about being on a jury because I'm sure if it was anything substantial, uh, I wouldn't want to lie beforehand to the judge about, because they ask you these questions if you believe in it. So what am I going to do? Tell a lie to the judge, you can get in trouble for that. So it would be impossible that I never would have been on a jury, even if I'd been selected, which I never was by happenstance. But yeah, I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see that make a comeback. Maybe if that could be somehow popularized in the zeitgeist that people have the ability to do that. I mean,
Well,
everyone I know always tries to get out of jury duty, but if come into the jury duty with you think you can actually do
yeah,
some good.
of, of course, because jury nullification, a jury being forced to serve on a jury, it's actually involuntary servitude. And so my solution to that problem would be that everything should be voluntary, and you should have professional jurors who are selected as jurors because they are knowledgeable, they're wise, they're incorruptible. Those are the people that you want for jurors, not just any bum off the street who, yeah, I'm happy to serve and get $35 a day and three hots while I'm on the jury. That's not the kind of person you want on a jury. You want somebody that's you know properly qualified by what I just said.
Yeah, and
So
especially
all of this.
there's so much energy put into like jury consultants too to try and
Oh
get
yeah. Oh yeah.
to
Yeah.
manipulate it.
Selecting the right. Yeah. The whole thing is a charade.
Yeah, it's a charade. I agree. Okay, so let's get to some of these questions. Someone asks about what's going on with Ancap radio. So it haven't been broadcast since July and haven't heard anything about it on X.
Well, that's really Dave Henderson's baby. Uh, Dave is a very old friend of mine. He lives in New Zealand, and in New Zealand, he's got a very interesting backstory, and there was a movie done about his life called Be Very Afraid. And he's absolutely fearless and incorruptible. Among other things, he ran 4 radio stations in New Zealand in the 4 major cities that were actually Ancap radio stations. Anyway, don't want to get into that. So we decided to do this the radio thing on X, promoting free market values and that. And so Dave is trying to figure out a way to make it viable. And viable means economic. And economic means, not a money loser anyway. So I think it'll come back.
Okay. All right. Next question is, do you believe prohibition impacted organized crime? And if so, what impact might CBDCs have on organized crime?
Prohibition impacted organized crime very, very favorably. I mean, prohibition actually supercharged, if not actually created, the mafia. Because before the mafia, you had some, low-life Italian migrants, and, they engage in minor unorganized crime, shaking people down and that. But when you illegalize a whole class of desirable drugs, if you would, alcohol,
Products.
products, yes. You need an organization to provide these products on a mass scale. And it happened to be a criminal organization because alcohol was made illegal. So, as usual, laws are wonderful for organized crime. And the same is true of illegalizing drugs. Drugs are bad, got to illegalize them. Well, okay, they're bad, but it's not your body, it's not your choice. And by illegalizing it, you've created these giant cartels and so forth. So it's counterproductive and stupid, like almost everything the government does. So that answers the first part of the question. And I don't think that there's any way for cartels or the mafia or whatever to get involved in cryptocurrencies or whatever.
Because the biggest thing with this, the idea is that if there's a black market in the money, or if money is made outside of the central bank digital currency illegal, then maybe there might be a black market, the criminal organized crime that forms around it. But the problem is that with the prohibition, the criminals were delivering a known product. They had to produce and distribute and sell a product. But with the CBDCs, you're not selling a product. You're not providing an alternative product. You want to provide an alternative means of exchange, and that's not really
no, that's right.
That's much harder to deliver.
In other words, digital currencies are things that people doing illegal things might use, but it's not the basis for their existence like alcohol during Prohibition was. So I'm all for. I'm a strong supporter of Bitcoin and any other digital currency that might arise that seems viable, like Bitcoin is. I'm not in favor of the government having a CBDC because that will be a means for them to control absolutely everything, because everything will go through them and their digital currency, whereas Bitcoin is informal and owned by the market, not controlled by the government. So different things, totally different things.
Okay, so next question is, could Trump get rid of the term limit on the basis of needing more time to complete his plans and to compete against long-term leaders like Putin and Xi? And that would give him the ability to provide stability like these long-term leaders can. In our 4-year cycle, it's easy to see how we might be outmaneuvered by countries that have leadership and policies that sustain beyond that.
Yeah. Well, the world in general and the US in particular is becoming increasingly unstable. And who knows what kind of a crisis situation will arise during the next 4 years. And maybe Trump or the people around him will decide, my God, we can't have an election in 28 because there's just going to be chaos. We can't have it. Maybe because there'll be secession movements in the country. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe because there's a gigantic economic financial crisis. Uh, who knows what it could be? They might decide that, like Zelensky, everybody's candidate for the best and wisest ruler in the world who runs the Ukraine. I mean, he decided not to have an election, and nobody ever talks about that. I thought it was supposed to be Ukraine. The Ukraine was supposed to be about defending democracy against Russia. It's a really stupid idea, but there's no, anything could happen in this degenerate multicultural domestic empire called the United States now.
All right. Next question is about Roger Ver. He asks if, given the recent imprisonment of Roger Ver, also known as Bitcoin Jesus, an early advocate for Bitcoin, have either of us read his book, Hijacking Bitcoin? We haven't. We discussed this earlier. Neither one of us have read it, but yeah, I know you've met Roger Ver and talked to him at least a couple times, right?
Yeah,
You know him.
yeah, no, I've spent some time with Roger. He's a very likable guy, uh, and a very sincere guy, and I think a very rich guy, also having been a very early adopter of Bitcoin. But I think Roger suffers from PTSD because of his interactions with the U.S. government and having already been imprisoned, because he's really a sensitive and gentle guy, not the kind of guy that does well in a prison. Okay, and that being the case, I don't understand what he was doing in Spain, because for some reason, um, who, who's
John McAfee was the other
John
one.
McAfee, right, who became a friend of mine before he, what the hell was he doing in Spain, which has an extradition treaty with the US? He should have gone to Brazil, for God's sake, where uh, there's no extradition. And it
Well,
makes no
I
sense.
think that
What's right?
I,
What was Roger doing in Spain? I don't
I
understand
think
that.
they hadn't brought public charges on him yet, and as I understand it, he had this dispute with the IRS, but it was being, it was the lawyers talking, and there weren't charges filed. That's the way I understand it, and so um, it was. I think he was blindsided by the charges that showed up.
Yeah, well, I think he would have been better off in Brazil or some other non-extradition treaty government country that's somewhat at odds with the US government. That would help. I mean, look, nothing wrong with Russia, frankly. I mean, it's actually not a bad place to hang out. I mean, just as, if you're a citizen there who's got some money, I mean, it's not like the FSB is going to follow you around or anything like. It's not like in the Soviet days. It's actually kind of an okay place, whether you like Putin or don't like Putin, and other things. But it's actually a normal country. It would be a normal country if the U.S. wasn't making war on it. Should have gone to Russia. It worked okay for
Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's too bad. This situation with him's bad. And the thing is that this, because the arrest happened right after this book was published, it's great fodder for conspiracies that it's because he's revealing these details about Bitcoin and how I haven't read the book, but as I understand, it feels like it's been fundamentally captured, which is why he was a great endorser of the Bitcoin Cash fork, and why he, advocated for that for years and years. Um, and But I think the fact the timing people think is suspicious. This book comes out where he lays it all out, and then he's arrested. Of course, these issues were going back years, and it also should be said that he was arrested. He expatriated more than 8 years ago, like gave up his
Mhm.
U.S. citizenship a long time ago, and this is his alleged tax evasion comes from part of his, renouncing process. Where you have to do, you have to basically act as though you sold all the assets you own on the day before you expatriate, right?
Right, right. Yeah, well, Roger ought to be thankful that Kamala wasn't elected because he'd been a world of trouble. Maybe, maybe it'll be a story with a satisfactory or even a happy ending now that the Trumpies are involved because they say they're pro Bitcoin, and Trump has said that he wants to not tax American citizens who are living abroad, which is fair. We're about the only country in the world that does that. So we'll know more in 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, I hope so. The thing is that if he's so if like the Bitcoin community really turned against Roger because he was a strong advocate for this Bitcoin Cash, and the major selling point was the flaws that he saw in Bitcoin that didn't enhance freedom, I guess was the major theme of it. So I don't know. I wonder if it'll work against him in a way. I hope not. I mean, I hope that Trump will come in and I mean, especially if Biden's going to do a bunch of these silly pardons, maybe even Fauci, silly, destructive, evil pardons. But even hopefully Trump comes in and you know pardons Snowden and pardons Roger and oh I can't. What's the poor guy, the Silk Road guy who's been in prison for a long time now.
Oh, Ross Ulbricht.
Ross Ulbricht, yeah. Hopefully he pardons these people and and all the J6 people too. Just puts these issues in the past.
God, I hope Trump does that. Well,
If he doesn't pardon Ross, then I think that's an unforgivable oversight on his part. He should have done it in his first term.
should have done it in his. Yeah, the problem with Trump, of course, as I've said many times, he has absolutely no philosophical core. He's just got gut feelings. And since he's a cultural conservative, we like a lot of his gut feelings, but they're unpredictable and based on nothing but gut feeling. That's the problem with Trump. So,
Right? He pardoned Lil Wayne, and some other rapper, but didn't pardon Ulbricht.
yeah, it's crazy. It really is. This is going to be so interesting the next 4 years. In fact, the next 2 months might even be interesting. I mean, things are,
Doug, every week has been interesting for the last 4 years, really. Let's be
it,
honest. It's been
oh, it
exciting.
has. Right now it's like one of those old Western movies where they're under attack, and the one soldier says to the other, it's quiet out there. And the other guy says, yeah, I think it's too quiet. And it's kind of like that now, in between now and January, what, 20th or whenever he's installed.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. There's one more question. I didn't mention it to you beforehand, but someone just asked for comments on the Uruguayan elections. Uruguayan elections happened here. I guess the final round was last week or 10 days ago, something like that. And the center left candidate won. And I don't know, do you have any comments about Uruguayan politics or the candidate, anything at all?
Well, I don't follow it because I really don't. Like the last guy, what was his name? Kajepo.
Yeah.
I don't even know the names of these people. Uh, but from everything I could see and feel, he was a decent guy, an okay guy. And the new guy is apparently was mentored by Pepe Mujica, who was a ultra left radical during the 60s. But when he was in office, he didn't steal any money. I mean, he lived like a simple farmer and didn't really screw things up greatly. Well, he did a little bit. Like he had, I guess it was under Mujica that they installed a 0.00 tolerance for alcohol driving, which for a resort community, a beach community, is really kind of stupid and
Yeah.
unrealistic. So he did that. And the other thing that Mujica did was that, they used to say Uruguay was the Switzerland of South America with bank profit secrecy and things of that nature. And he kind of knocked those barriers down now. So you can determine one way or another who owns real estate and so forth, so, and this guy was mentored by him. So yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, this is kind of a slow-moving, socially stable country. I don't know. No firm opinions. He's not a raving lunatic, which he might have been, could have been.
Yeah, it's just the big thing with Uruguay, and I'm just, I've only been here for 3 years. So, you don't really, you can't, it's very hard to comment on unless you're really, really been in a place for a long time and you understand the nuances of the political winds and everything. But I asked my Ancap Uruguayan friends before he won, I said, well, what happens if this guy wins? Are you worried? And they're like, oh, no, man, it won't make it. Reality, it won't make any. They're basically all the same. They don't like the state, of course, in general, and they're like, yeah, around the edges, you get some things like we got under the last president, they increased the number of guns that an individual could own, for instance.
Oh yeah, right.
So you get these little benefits, and so maybe they'll for the new. Maybe there's something around the edge where they move that back down to where it was before. But like it's just trimming is around the edges, is probably what I would expect.
I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Yeah, that's the way I read it too. So
Okay.
no big negative change.
One positive thing is that Uruguay has been trying to get a free trade agreement with China for a long time, and because we're in the trade bloc with the Mercosur countries here, so Brazil and Argentina, it was always made impossible by our much larger, much more powerful neighbors. But Milei, of course, wants a free trade agreement with the US and other countries. So he's pushing very hard to break that rule and get it broken for all of the countries in this trade bloc, which would be really good for everyone down here. Maybe not great for short term for controlled interest in Brazil, which is kind of the major veto on all these things. But yeah, I mean, I think hopefully we'll get some positive things from Milei, even, infecting things here indirectly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, as Argentina straightens up and starts flying right, yeah, it'll have a favorable influence on Uruguay, certainly, and maybe Brazil too, maybe Chile too.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's it for today, Doug. So we'll leave it there, and then we'll be back. Geez, what's today? Oh, today's Friday, right? Yeah. I don't
Yeah,
even
we're
know. Yeah, today's Friday. Oh my God, I can't even lost track of what day of the week it is. So
No,
we'll
I
be
don't
back
think
next week.
no, it's academic. Yeah, and we're advancing towards the end of the year.
It's coming fast. We got our Christmas tree already, Doug. Or not already, but it's about that time.
Yeah, well, once again, to quote a rock song, and rock songs actually are the poetry of our days. It's not like people don't read poetry anymore. People don't read Wordsworth and God knows who, but they quote rock songs, and rock song lyrics are the poetry of our days. So what is that? It's a workaday world, and the whistle blows, and another day goes down the drain.
As does another podcast. All right. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah.
We'll see you next.
Okay, Matt. Thanks.